Hi there, everyone. I am the senior teenager, a millennial in spirit. I call myself with the benefit of hindsight. And I have a very interesting guest today, a storyteller, a remarkable storyteller. I've watched some of her videos. Let me tell you more about her. But first, what are we here to talk about? We are here to talk about generational diversity. It is a thing today. Now, Sujatha Singh with me is, and hello, Sujatha, before I start introducing you, and welcome to the Teenager Small Big Talk, I'm calling it these days.
That sounds so nice, so interesting. Hi, Nirja, how are you?
Very well, Sujatha, and
Very excited to be here.
absolutely. This is a subject really close to my heart, and let's dive into it. Sujatha is a certified ICF executive coach, 22 years of experience overall. She's done 19 years of end-to-end training cycle management, and she's a postgraduate of general management from IIM Kozhikode, that's right. And
Correct.
economics from the Madras University, Chennai. It used to be called Madras University. She's also a certified professional behavioral analyst from TTI USA. You'll tell us a little more about this, Sujata. TTI
Of
and
course.
NLP practitioner. And a full-time role was the most recent one was as the director of organizational development at Sharda University, where she catered to the learning and skill development needs of the faculty, management team, and students. She's a storyteller by passion and a helicopter mom, she says, by choice. And in her spare time, she teaches singing to special children free of cost. That's a remarkable thing you're doing. I did mention ICF. ICF, for everybody's awareness, is International Coach Federation, from where she has a certification. Tell us a little more, Sujata, about your TTI USA, which I don't know the full form of. Thank you.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much, Nirja. Coming from you, the introduction sounds even better. Okay. So TTI is Target Training International. It's based in Pennsylvania, and it is one of the flagship universities, institutes that gives DISC certification to professionals across the world. So that's what TTI is.
Thank you. Sujata, you are a generation just on the cusp of the millennials. And I know it sounds a little ridiculous to many people and to classify people as generations in these cohorts and swords. However, we are shaped by our culture, right? The music we grew up listening to, the stories we grew up on, and the books we read. And each generation today, Sujata, I believe, is like a culture because it's so hyper connected every generation. Now, millennials, there has been so much of talk about millennials. And we have the Gen Z following. And you are living with several generations. You have your children, you have your parents, and I, and you are three different generations.
Of course.
So, my question is I'm fascinated with this idea of, particularly in India, Sujata. What has your experience been with generation gap? Because I think the Indian millennials are a trifle different from the millennials in the rest of the world, particularly, let's say, UK or USA, what we call conveniently the Western world.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Is there a difference? Are Indian millennials a little different?
Oh, okay. So that's such an interesting topic. One, two, the very fact that we are Indian changes the whole equation for us, because today, even though of course more and more people are accepting and more adapting the nuclear family setup, and there are only two parents working, and then there's maybe a single child or two children at home. Parents are pretty far away. The other generation is pretty far away, though connected every day on video calling today. But then the very fact is that the ethos with which we have grown up, we are trying, most of us in our generation and the generation that is a little later than us also, are trying to still create the same ethos, the same culture around our children. So the children, as a result, are quite confused.
Yes.
Are quite confused because there's so much, and there's so much of culture and heritage and everything that we talk about in our generation, and then when they go back and try to make sense of it through social media, which is so easily available to them, they find that there is a completely different world out there. So
Exactly.
that's the kind of generational gap that we see in India. In India, it is हमारे दिन ऐसे थे, आप ऐसे हो, और आपके बच्चे तो बिल्कुल ही. That is what we hear all the time. So that's what our children are dealing with day in and day out. The fact that you're not expected to question a parent, that's not something that is good. Um, right? Or दादाजी से ऐसे बात नहीं करते, दादी जी से ऐसे बात नहीं करते. You can't ask them a question. Whatever they say, you just have to accept it and move forward. And then the child looks at you saying, okay, but then the spirit of inquiry, something that my school is encouraging today. I am allowed to question my
Exactly.
teacher. And then
Exactly.
again, there are some teachers in school, and the teacher also comes back. There are some of the traditional teachers who say, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to question
Yes.
me. And some teachers are much more playway in terms of their method and pedagogy that they're using in class. So it's a very confused generation. We've all very successfully created such a generation that has the best of many worlds, but also the worst of all those worlds.
Now, this what you just said, this is something that really rings in my ears all the time. The best of everything. This generation, the with the most supportive set of parents, with the
Yeah.
most indulgent and resourceful grandparents. My grandparents were indulgent, but they didn't have the resources.
True.
So today, and the best of education, the best of facilities, the best of connectedness, everything, the best of knowledge available at their fingertips, right?
Absolutely.
Just a click away.
Absolutely.
And
True.
yet, and yet they have, they have kind of bought into this international millennial script of anxiety and psychic pain and uh, some kind of emptiness, a void inside,
The
which is,
teenage angst. I mean, the teenage.
yes,
I'm a parent coach as well. So there is a lot of
yes.
teenage angst, and from time to time, there are people coming to me saying, "Okay, my son needs help." And then when I talk to the child, he's just a teenager. He's in between those ages, or maybe even a preteen. And then I suddenly realize that it's the parents who have to take coaching, not the child,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
he's the way he is because of the culture or because of the setup around him.
Because
So,
of the setup.
yes.
But how is it playing out at work in companies? You've been with Sharda University. You would have experienced such a huge interface, right, with the young people, with the older
Yes.
people. So how does it play out? Are there? They also say, Sujata, that there's a social revolution in our country right now in India.
Yes.
There are in pockets a lot of experimenting is going on, right, which parents may not be aware of. So in your experience at Sharda University, how did this generation gap play out in real terms?
Anirja, I think in the university, because the university is like a small world in itself.
Yes.
There are so many cultures, and Sharda University, in fact, has 83 different countries. I mean, students from
Wow.
83 different countries, international students, who are there. And you would see that, okay, the youth that join in, the students that join in from Indian states, and they get so much exposure from various
Yes.
international societies and their cultures that they end up questioning almost everything. And then you have very traditional people who are a part of the university, maybe 15 to 20% of the university. You have that set of professors, of PhDs, who have around 30, 40, almost 30 plus years of experience, and they find it very difficult to adjust with the student mindset of today, because they've grown up in a very different place. And as you rightly point, around 10 to 15% of these professors are also, because of their exchange programs and because of international influences and experience that they've gathered, they are also trying to change their methodology of teaching, their way of interacting with student communities. But that's a very small percentage. More than 70 to 80% of the people are still uh, a little different, or they're not too adaptive of change, not too flexible. when it comes to this.
But then how do they fight? Do they run away? Do they fight or flee or hide or shut their doors or
They do
what?
all they do all of these, and then when it's almost time for their final assessments or their mid assessments, then all parties suddenly realize, okay, we have a common goal. Can we please get together and please make sense of what we need to pursue or excel at? So that's something that happens a lot in the university.
But so this is the lighter part of
Yes,
putting it, Sujata. But it can also
yes,
lead to serious consequences. It can lead to mental health issues
it
because
does.
the shame is so deep sometimes of not being able to have conversations that you need to have. You need to talk about your parents about a relationship that you might be in, maybe some inadequacy that you feel deep down, and you're not
True.
able to express it to people who matter the most to you, and you are being peer parented. Your parents are either the peers or YouTube.
Yes,
Now it
absolutely.
can, yeah, and then it can lead to these sense of alienation, estrangement, mental health issues, and in extreme cases sometimes loss of life has happened. Sujata, it's happened on campuses, right, where
It,
parents are
it
the last to know.
Yes, it does happen. And
Hmm.
this happens again more so. I mean, there are certain cases in which I've seen children who belong to a farmer's family, for
Yeah.
example, okay, a poor farmer who has mortgaged half of his land just so
Hmm.
that he can see his son as a graduate in law school. Okay, and then the boy
Yes.
actually wanting to be a YouTuber or a Bhojpuri film star
Hmm.
instead, and
Yes.
having to face so much ostracization, so much alienation from the others who are academically inclined, only because the parents have already taken so much of a loan, and there are four other children that he needs to be responsible for. You have all of this that is very typical of the
Yes.
Indian ethos, and then the boy or the girl not being able to actually bear the pressure. That is when people like me, or we have a wellness center in every university today. We have a very clear counseling and coaching setup in which we have mentors for every year we have assistant professors who are junior most and almost at the same generation as the students, playing that part, playing
Yes.
that part of bridging these two generations. And they try to
Right.
understand. There is an early warning system in which we are able to see some behavioral changes in a student. We're able to actually call him out, maybe go out for a cup of coffee with him, just take her out maybe, or try to understand what they're going through. So here, yes, there are always some kids, some children who you are not able to help. They will slip through the cracks, but
Yes.
the percentages, the numbers are very less today because of the mentoring and the coaching system that most universities are now adapting to. Of course, this is a culture that's already present outside. In India, it's fairly recent. So yes, it is true that we are facing this. There are still some children whom we are not able to help, some students that just slip through the cracks, but the rest of them, I've had some people some students just walking into my room, opening the cabin door and saying, ma'am, I need a hug. And I'm like,
Oh,
oh, please, please come. I'm always available.
wow.
And them giving me a tight hug and saying, okay, you don't know how good that feels, because I've had such a terrible fight with my parents. And
Yes.
then them feeling a little different about that generation of parents, saying, okay, ma'am is also the same generation, so maybe my mom also feels this way, and then going back, trying
Yes.
to, yeah. So because sexuality is very different,
Absolutely.
live-in
Absolutely.
is different. You have the
Yes.
LGBT. You have so many things
Yes.
that are happening. There are so many permutations and combinations that are happening in their life, and social media is not making it any easier. Yes, a lot of information is easily available, but how you channelize that information is where the whole story unfolds.
Sujata, it's channelizing is one thing. There's another fundamental question involved, that of buying into a script without questioning it. Now, there's this global script that celebrating your sexuality is important, claiming your public space is important for a woman, and uh, expressing your most authentic self, what we call be the best version of yourself.
Yes,
These have become dictums that nobody stops to question.
yes,
Now, this narrative has not been challenged. this
True.
is perhaps a narrative which has evolved in on some other soil, on in some other culture with a
Yes.
certain build up,
Yes.
and we are just buying into it without stopping to offer an alternative,
Absolutely. Or even
right?
customizing it to our sentiments.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Customizing it too.
Yes.
Nobody's doing that. What you are doing, what we are all trying to do is manage the change somehow. Uh, have the older generation be more open, be more accepting. For instance, in my conversation with older people, I tell them that your role is to be a parking slot. These cars are overheated, you know, they are
They'll come to you to vent.
overstimulated.
Yes.
Yes, that you need
Yes.
to be a parking slot. That's all. No judgment, no criticism, right? That's what we are operating upon.
Yes. Yes.
However, the entrepreneurial experimenting ought that to be done on the parents' expense, for instance, who mops up after the children when they are done growing. There's a mopping up involved. Every action has a consequence, right?
Yes, yes. And it's usually, I mean, the mopping up is left, the dirty job is left to the parents,
Yes,
and the
dirty
grandparent
job
then
is left.
is there to indulge. And then
There,
you're like, oh God, you indulge them so much, and you're not allowing me to be myself with my children. It does happen with in everyone's families, and today it is much more relevant. It's actually because the child questions you. You have your child,
hmm?
and your child is actually a teenager, and the child just openly questions you, saying the circumstances are very different. We are dealing with a very different environment. So for us, this is true, and we'd like to adapt it just the way that it is internationally as well. And then
Hmm.
you're like, okay, but how would you go out of the Indian, your builder society or builder floor, and then say, okay, now I'm adapting this culture, and I don't want anyone else to judge me? How is that going to happen? Right? That
Exactly,
is the
exactly.
problem, is with acceptability of the outside of this bubble that we've created
Hmm.
for our children. Most of us are a part of this generation, right? Or this social class in which we have created a beautiful bubble for our children. But
Yes,
then 95% of India is still the same. The minute this bubble bursts and the child is outside in society, he or she is going to be judged.
that's true.
Within this beautiful Delhi, Gurgaon builder floor, or a housing society,
Hmm.
my child will never feel judged because the others also have the same sentiments and the same. They're also buying into the same script.
Yes,
But the
and
minute she goes and even hails a rickshaw or an auto, and she sits in the auto to go to her school, high school or to college or university, she will start getting judged, and then she wouldn't know how to react to it, how to accept, how to respond, because her bubble was very different. That's the problem here in today.
that's the problem. And parents, I believe, are on the firing line these days. Parents are the ones on the firing line.
Yeah.
They are, in some cases, frightened of their children, Sujata. It sounds very strange. Yes, it is. Today,
Yes. Yes.
today, that is a reality. What they say, collapse of parenting.
Yes.
A parent has a certain mandate, right? And the mandate is to keep the child safe, secure, and thriving and prospering. But you
True.
cannot do that unless you exercise a certain control, unless the society
Absolutely.
permits
A
you to have
certain
some
discipline.
authority.
Yes. A
Yes,
certain discipline, a certain control, which is lacking today.
which is lacking.
Because most
And
children
that
say,
is,
okay, I wish I were in the US. I would have walked out by now. I'm
yes,
14.
yeah, yes.
And you're like, 14? I wouldn't be able to open up. I mean, it was a ninth standard when I was 14, and I wouldn't dare even ask such a question. See, that's exactly
Exactly.
what we're dealing.
And that's playing out, I think, in the workspaces also. There's a sense of entitlement, and you want to question everything. For
Yes.
instance, millennial or maybe employees who are being onboarded, they'd like to have access to a lot more information, and the
True.
older people don't know how to react because for them it was different. So
True.
this is one thing that we struggle with at work. And one more thing, Sujata, the way we are bringing up our girls. I have two daughters, and in retrospect now, I sometimes question myself whether I did the right thing by telling them that the world is their oyster and they can be whatever they want. And uh, we got my elder one a mobike, which now when I look back and I wonder at that, what was What were we thinking at that time? So
No,
there's,
but yeah,
yeah.
I guess yes, I know what you're talking about, Neerja. I can resonate with it. I have two girls myself, so there are times in which I'm in conflict. There is that deep conflict in me, saying, okay, should I do it the way I've always dreamt of parenting, or should I do it in a little more practical, or maybe a blended form? Can I do it this way? Is what
Blended
I
form.
question. Yeah, a blended form in which you're exercising both, but 50% of each. 50%. Okay, fine, you're allowed to do whatever you want to, but these are the limitations. This is the society that we actually live in. So this is something that is very difficult, especially because the generation may question each one of these, each instruction that you give, or any piece of advice that you give is then further questioned, because yes, that's the kind of life that we're living today.
Not just questions, Sujata. Sometimes they will drag you to therapy also. They'll tell you, they'll blame you. They'll blame
Yes,
you for a lot of things that are
and
going
it's because
wrong.
of you that I have not done this, or it's because of you that this
Yes.
has not happened in my life.
Yes. Yes.
And that's when you say, okay, that's where your responsibility comes in, saying each decision is your own choice. I may only say something. Even my parents said the same thing. They said, okay, now this is what the options look like. They were very democratic. These are the 4, 5 options you have. Now up to you. Is this what you want to choose, or is there something else? So much later, went back to my dad or mom saying, why didn't you just push me into something? And then they said, okay, maybe because we
if
thought that was ideal parenting, us being democratic.
if they had pushed you into something, you might have turned around and questioned them. Why did you push me into
So we
this?
are never. I mean, this is what happens. This generational gap has continued existing over various generations, and it will continue doing so. And as you rightly pointed out in the corporate, how I see this panned out, if I may. Um,
Please.
this pans out in the way that, okay, we have the new recruits, and the new recruits are built to question,
Okay.
are built to actually seek explanations, built to understand the big picture right from the beginning. Even as a new recruit, his ideas may be, entrepreneurial, maybe he thinks like the CEO of the organization. He
Right.
says we, okay, us, and then he speaks this way. Whereas a generation before me, and maybe a generation before that generation as well, these are generations that I've been lucky to see at work, because there are many retirees also who got back to work in the processes that I've worked earlier.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that gap is glaring, because that generation waits for instructions very nicely, very prim and proper. They will go by the book, won't question. They still have the reverence for the manager, and I'm like, what
Yes.
reverence?
Yes.
The first
Yes.
name basis, or the reverence for the manager. All these first name basis is something they were many of them were very uncomfortable with. I had to take them through a culture sensitization program, because I was a part of training. We had to incorporate this. We had to help people, blend in. So we did that with both parties here,
Yes.
because it was very difficult to even get a brainstorming exercise done without ruffling feathers, without stepping on toes,
Yes.
when we have two
Absolutely.
different generations. Because the older generation will wait for their turn. They'll be really polite. They'll wait for their turn. They'll follow all the courtesies. And the youngsters are all over the place. They will interrupt. They will question. Let's say, hey, that sounds like such. I mean, that's so impractical, is what he would say, without even thinking that, okay, you're talking to a 65-year-old. What is this? It won't happen. So these are things that we have seen pan out, but they bring in, the older generation brings in so much experience, practical experience, that we
Yes.
can tap into.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the younger generation brings in a new perspective to everything. So it's like a beautiful marriage that you can do. And that's what many organizations are doing today, because we have a lot of culture sensitization programs happening right from the beginning. And if we find that we have a very heterogeneous team, we again take them through a normalization of everyone understanding what the overall vision of the organization is, what is the mission, where do all of these people fit into the master puzzle, so that
Yes.
then there is an alignment. Everyone is not
Yes.
then thinking of only himself. He's thinking of how they're aligning to the overall goal of the
Right.
organization. Yeah, that's what we do.
Yes. And that is what the entire exercise, even this conversation that we're having, is about. That, about how can you harness those diversities better, and how
Yes.
can you understand where each generation is coming from, what were the compulsions of the earlier generation on why they were sending their children to engineering colleges. And
True. Absolutely.
parents have been so maligned, for sending their children to engineering colleges, but somebody has to tell the whole world that here is a system. Economic liberalization came to India
Yes.
only in the 1990s,
True.
and then you have a country where there is no state support, there is no system in place. If something happens to your child, you're completely on your own or at the mercy of your immediate friend circle of family. That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have no
Even the
other resources.
ambulance, nothing. Even the ambulance will not get to you. There's so many, fears and anxieties that parents, Indian families raise their children.
The social
And
security system is
yes,
almost missing.
it's almost missing. And there's only this much, the extent to which families go to put their
Yes.
children through, yes, through an education.
True.
And then today, when the child turns around and says, I want to open a bhukkad, a food stall after studying engineering.
Yes, absolutely. We had startup ideas at the university, and every year we would support, we would incubate some of them that had a lot of potential. And the kind of ideas that kids would come up with, one would talk about a laundromat, one would talk about, of course, many would talk about food, because food is, of course, the sucker of
Yes,
life.
yes.
So, so there were so many food related joints, but yes, there's a lot more acceptability. I mean, acceptance of entrepreneurship today is a little more than it was maybe even 4 or 5 years back.
It is, Sujata. It also has to come with support, because only a very small percentage will succeed. What will happen to the
True.
95 who will not?
Yes.
And who will look after their mental health? Who will prepare
Absolutely.
them, right? The fallout. So,
Absolutely.
as long as you go into things prepared and with your eyes open and in some kind of an anticipation, then
But
things are
Nirja,
okay.
that's exactly where parenting and grandparenting comes in. Grandparenting to very nicely, very sweetly put it to them that okay, 98% fail, so you need to have a plan B or a plan
Exactly.
C. Priyanka
Yes.
Chopra talks about a plan B and plan C. I mean,
but
imagine.
but 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 millennials don't, right? My teenagers don't, because they are brought up on a diet of all these unicorns and these tech
Yes,
titans, and they
yes,
believe that they can just take off into the sunset and
true.
uh, create along the way and learn along the way. But along the way, then there is a lot else that is breaking and scattering, right?
Absolutely, because hardly anyone has actually stood at a government office and filled a form, because
Yes, exactly.
dad or mom
Mm,
or their support system, their peons, or their class, their support employees have gone and
yes,
done all your domestic jobs, everything else in the house. So
yes,
you
yes.
don't know reality as it
You
is.
don't know, exactly. You don't
And
know reality.
we and our our parents are squarely to blame for that, because we've not allowed them that. I'm getting some home truths today when I'm talking about it also.
We haven't allowed that, and now we are too scared to tell them the truth also.
Yes, yes. Now they're like, okay, is this how the world actually is? So
हाँ,
yes,
अभी डर है कि सेल्फ एस्टीम टूट जाएगा ना.
yes. And we've actually built it up from age one or age two, saying he's an individual. I have to nurture the individual now.
Yes,
I can't give him any
yes,
shocks. All the
yes.
children are equal. No first, no second. Everyone gets a
Can't give.
prize. Yes, everyone gets a prize. I mean, half a mile dur hai, फिर भी उसको prize मिलेगा. So we are doing all of this, isn't it? As we are growing them this way. So I guess again, Indianization is much better if you ask me.
Indianization better, and in conclusion, maybe a question the script that you're buying into. And I think it's important for the parents also, Sujata, to be aware of this and to contest it at times. I think we
Absolutely.
are just flowing along with this fashion, the global thinking, without stopping to
Yes.
ask.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Sujata.
Thank
And
you, Nirja. It was such fun. Thank you.
yes, yes. Look forward to meeting you again and talking about this at some other time.
Of
Take care.
course. Of course. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye, Sujata. Thanks. So that brings me to the end of this, and I will see you again next week with a similar episode and talk about generational issues at work and at home. Thank you.